welcome to another episode of the Phys and Phys Ed podcast. Today's topic is reaching all students in PE, and our guest today is Cyndi Naylor from the Office of Health and Physical Education. Welcome, Cyndi.
Thank you, Justin.
You want to just give us a background? I know you've been in Baltimore County for many years now, so give us a background of your experience so far in our county.
Okay, when I started in Baltimore County, I was originally hired as a middle school PE teacher where I taught middle school PE, but within my school, we had some of the self-contained special ed programs. So very quickly, I was thrown into teaching students with disabilities, pretty significant ones, and taught a separate adapted class and got to know my adapted PE resource teachers. And then after some time teaching middle school, I transitioned into the office and took on a role as an adapted PE resource teacher. And I've been doing that for quite a while.
For sure. And I believe you had Dr. Boucher back in the Towson days, correct?
Yes, I did, Dr. Boucher.
Yeah, I think many of us did for that APE credit we had to take, right?
Yes.
So let's talk today. What supports for, if we're talking about reaching all students and specifically our APE students, what supports or services are provided for those students with disabilities?
Okay, when you think of teaching PE to students with disabilities, it kind of falls into, I kind of consider it two different categories. And we'll kind of start with the adapted PE side, which is your more significant students. This is, when you're thinking the types of supports kids with adapted PE, it's more significant. And, to start off, adapted PE is a direct special education service. It's, you determine that a student needs adapted PE through a formal assessment. And in order to qualify, student must be at least performing 2 years below grade level. So when you think of our national standards, they have to really be significantly below. And when you've determined that, then you've determined that a student needs specially designed instruction, meaning that they need, for lack of better words, special ed PE. And that specially designed instruction is driven by the goals and objectives that are put on a student's IEP. So they're addressing whatever their areas of need are. Now, that whole purpose of specially designed instruction is to narrow the gap from where the student is performing and trying to get them closer onto grade level with their peers. And just like any other special ed service, adapted PE can be in the general ed setting for PE, like inclusion, or it can be in a separate setting or what might be called outside general ed, or that adapted PE class that some schools in our county have. So that's kind of that more significant level of support. And in some cases, you might have a student that's on an IEP for a disability and maybe doesn't need specially designed instruction or goals and objectives, but needs some modifications. Maybe they need some behavior supports in phys ed or some modified activities or equipment and things like that. Those can be noted on a student's supplementary aids and services page of their IEP, but that's not adapted PE program. There's no goals or objectives. Now, if you kind of move down the continuum, beyond that, you do have students in our buildings that have disabilities or conditions that require some modifications to their school day, their access to curriculum, and possibly in physical education. Those might be things like a student with a heart condition or a student with visual impairments. Maybe they have sickle cell anemia or a mild physical impairment or disability. We can make modifications to their PE program and we can document those on a 504. A 504 is not an IEP. There's no goals and objectives, and it's not technically adapted PE. It's just modifications to their program. And those can be all kinds of things. That might be no contact sports or reduced distances when they travel. They might need rest breaks if they have a heart condition and you want to make sure their heart rate doesn't get too high. So when you're looking at students with disabilities, they can kind of their needs can be addressed in a couple of different ways. So it's just a matter of what their needs are and where they're performing to determine the best way to support them.
And I think, like you said, it's not a blanket that covers everybody. It's really specific to each situation and each student, and what their conditions are and what they can and can't do, or what they're capable of. It's not a one size fits all program, correct?
Correct. And most definitely that it's individualized. That IEP is called an individualized education plan. It's specific to that student. A 504 for one student with a heart condition is not going to look exactly like a 504 for another student. So it's really based on what the student's needs are. And that takes some time, and that's our adapted PE team is always there to help support teachers in developing that and making those modifications or developing an IEP.
And that's where there's a little bit of crossover, like for our teachers who may not have APE students, but they, as phys ed teachers, we're always making modifications for students, whether it be lowering the net or decreasing the distance because they can't hit it as far. And those aren't documented on an IEP or anything or a 504, but we're always making those changes. The idea being to help all our students be successful.
And that's that's exactly right, Justin, because I think when you're looking at providing quality physical education to students, no matter whether they have disabilities or not, but sometimes it can be challenging. But if you look at your program and you look at different ways that you can provide supports, you're going to reach the students that may have varying abilities, but also students with disabilities. And there's a lot of different ways that you can address those.
And like you said, I mean, that's where yourself and Jenny and Beth come in, offering that support to teachers for those ideas of how to modify it and make not just, the students that require those modifications, but any student that may be having difficulties with a certain skill or activity that you're doing. Your team provides those modifications and those ideas that teachers may not be thinking of.
Yes, I mean, our title is Adapted PE Resource Teacher, and students that have adapted PE in Baltimore County, that's just a small percentage of students that we have. There's a lot of students that have disabilities or conditions that may have a 504 that we provide support on, but you may, in your phys ed classes, you're going to have students of varying abilities. We all know that not every student has the same ability, and it's really a good idea to start looking at how you can provide different things in physical education to meet the needs of all your students.
And what are some specific strategies? You like you said, you've been doing this for a long time now. What are some specific things that would help, any teacher listening to this podcast, some ideas of strategies to help reach all these students, again, regardless of whether they have disabilities or not, but what are some of the strategies that you see implemented the most to make it accessible for everyone in the class?
Well, I think probably one of the first things that I can recommend as a strategy is displaying a good attitude about providing different types of instruction to various abilities, whether it's a student with a disability or students that aren't athletes, that maybe don't really enjoy physical education or physical activity, is that having an attitude and an understanding that, it's our role as physical educators to make students physically literate. That's what our standards talk about. And we're trying to progress them and make them physically literate no matter where they're starting or what their ability is. And so having that attitude, and I know that our teachers have a lot of things on their plate and a lot of things that they're doing, lots of students, grading, behaviors, coverages. But first and foremost, if you're displaying a positive attitude about trying to provide, quality instruction to your students, that's going to go a long way. If you're kind of coming in and you seem annoyed and frustrated by all that's going on, it's just going to trickle downward. And I think that's probably attitude is probably number one, I would think.
Yeah, attitude makes the difference, for sure. There's a saying that says that.
I mean, and I also think that providing a balanced curriculum, our SHAPE national standards look at a variety of areas that, the physically literate individual has learned the skills to participate in a variety of physical activities and knows the benefit. And there's different types of activities, whether it's invasion or net wall, individual sports, rhythms, and dance, that if you can provide a balanced curriculum and provide a balance of activities, you're going to have more students that want to be involved. Some students are not into team sports. Maybe they prefer something more individual. You may have a student with a disability, maybe a visual impairment in your class that, catching objects or striking objects that are flying in the air, no matter how many different colors you use, it's very difficult for them. But if you're providing different activities, maybe a fitness activity or some kind of dance, or maybe a target activity where they're throwing or rolling an object to a target, they're going to have more opportunities to be involved and maybe have some success. So trying to provide things from different areas, and I guess we look at our instructional strands and trying to provide different things. Really trying to provide that. And I always used to make the joke, if you're looking at your yearly plan and everything in there involves the use of a ball, then it's not really a balanced curriculum. And that can be hard. It can be hard to go outside of your comfort level and teach something that is new to you, or maybe you're not overly comfortable participating in or having the skills of, but it's definitely going to be a benefit to students.
Yeah, and that's not just APE students. I mean, those strands of instructions are colored with rainbow colors, and that's on purpose so that you can teach every color of the rainbow to all your students and give them a very varied experience throughout the year.
And those different strands are also tied in to the standards that we have. So there's standards-based education is what we're looking at, and that ties into students with disabilities and adapted PE goals because their goals are standards based. So if you look at our national standards we have for physical education, our state of Maryland standards, or even looking at our BCPS performance-based outcomes, they were written and designed to provide a variety and to allow students to meet with success, and they build on each other. If you teach middle school or high school and you look at the national standards and look all the way back to elementary, you'll see that there's a progression from kindergarten all the way up in those different areas, and they build on each other. So by going back to the standards and really seeing, okay, what are students supposed to be learning at this grade level, you're really able to hit a lot of areas. You can look at social emotional behavior, their gross motor skills, strategies and concepts, the cognitive piece of it. And then if you have a student with a disability that's struggling, you can kind of say, all right, well, if this is the skill they're supposed to be doing in 6th grade, where are they? Okay, I'm kind of back mapping a little bit to see where they are maybe elementary wise, and it gives you a guide of where you should be progressing. So relating your instruction back to the standards is a definite.
For sure. And so back to something you just talked about. So let's suppose I have a student who is having difficulty. What are some things I can do to help support them? What would be, within the class itself? Planning for these lessons? I know the student needs some support. What's the process I could go through to help put supports in place for any student that's in that situation?
Well, I think number one is looking to see where the student is, kind of informally seeing where they are and where they're performing. And if a student is struggling to hit a ball over a volleyball net, well, can we lower the net? Because is the standard or the outcome about being able to perform the skill? It doesn't say anything about how high the net is. Do you need to maybe change the piece of equipment they're using? Maybe they're struggling hitting the small white volleyball. Can we use a trainer or a beach ball? And those are interventions and some modifications that you can put into place. And if you put those into place and the student's meeting with success, the more opportunities you have for practice, the more opportunities you give them, their skills going to improve. They may not be able to perform an overhand serve from the service line in the back with a white volleyball over top of a regulation size net, but can they take that skill and play volleyball with family at a picnic? Yes. So first thing is kind of looking to see what are interventions and things you can put into place to see if there's success. And and that kind of ties into the whole idea of differentiation, which is, a way to modify that you can differentiate the equipment, the activity, that you can differentiate the rules a little bit. Maybe you're not always offering a game that is the rules and played exactly the way it might be if you're playing high school sports or club soccer, that you're changing it up, changing the number of people that are playing, changing the playing area, doing those kinds of things to see if they're meeting with success. If students are still struggling to be on grade level and you still have concerns, that's always a time that you can call in an adapted PE person. If this is a student with a disability or has some needs, that you can ask for some advice. But it's definitely, slowing down and looking to see how you can differentiate. There's, I think years ago we had shared something called a differentiation ladder. Like, what is it that you're teaching to everyone? Okay, well, where is the student? Are they a level below? So how do we bring it down a couple levels so that they're meeting with success? And at times, you're going to have students that you might have a target of what you want them to do, and they're performing well above that. Well, we need to challenge them as well. It's not going to be enjoyable if they already know how to perform that skill and they're working well below their ability. How can you challenge them? How can you extend it? How can you make it more challenging and have them grow as well? So the whole idea of differentiation is a big one, and really looking at what you can provide and how you can differentiate. And you used a word when you first asked me the question, Justin. It's looking at planning and really taking the time and planning when you're looking for your lessons and your units, is coming up with a plan. Not just kind of rolling in and pulling out equipment and saying we're going to play basketball today without any thoughts about how you can differentiate to meet the needs of all your students.
For sure. It's taking that student-centered approach and kind of envisioning the lesson and being proactive about some things that you think may pose obstacles to the students and finding ways to get around them in the planning process, not at the time of when the student's in your class, but thinking, like you said, hey, maybe I need to drop the nets because that would help, or maybe we have a different line that we're throwing from or something like that. So definitely sliding down the toward the student-centered end of the spectrum, I think, as far as instruction goes, is important.
Well, and I think you're right in that you're looking at the idea of making your instruction student-centered, that you can provide different types of units. You can give student choice. We have some schools out there that allow their students to choose what units or activities they're going to participate in. Maybe we are in a soccer unit and you're giving them the option of participating at the end of the unit in a competitive type game or a non-competitive game. Maybe the non-competitive is more lead up. Maybe a student that is struggling and maybe isn't into soccer might choose to be in a more non-competitive environment where they can practice the skills and have fun, but they're being physically active. The competitive game can be for your students that, play rec or club soccer and are a little bit more, involved, and it gives them other opportunities to extend their skill. In the same right, you can also, look at ways that students can make choices about what they're doing. There's a way to differentiate. It's the whole idea of ability grouping, and maybe not necessarily having a teacher assign students of what group they're going to be in, but allow students themselves to make those choices. It could be, you say, all right, we are going to work on, we're at the end of the basketball unit and it's time for gameplay, and provide rubrics of these are the 3 levels, gold, silver, bronze. Maybe gold is your kids, that is for skills for students that are highly skilled. Your silver might be students that have basic skills, have basic understanding of basketball, and your bronze might be students that struggle with shooting and you want them to be physically active. You provide those rubrics, and allow students to place themselves at what level they want to participate in activity. If you're giving the students choices in some of that, they're going to have ownership, and I think you're going to have a lot more kids participating than avoiding activity. And I think that's a big problem that we're seeing, especially as students transition from elementary to middle and then high school, is that there's a decrease in participation. And if we give some students choice, allow them to have a little more say, it definitely makes a difference. And in that same right, when you're looking at student-centered, for students with disabilities or students that struggle, looking at the idea of self-advocacy. How can they advocate for themselves? So if I can advocate for myself and make choices about how I'm going to participate, that's going to carry over outside of school and in the physical activity or other activities they have in their daily life.
Yeah, that as you were talking, what came to my mind was it's definitely going to increase the student motivation and their active participation for sure. Because it's they're enjoying it, they're more apt to do it, right? So
Most definitely.
let's change gears slightly. I know we've been talking kind of all students in general right now, but let's kind of focus in now on our students that specifically have an IEP and what kind of resources or concepts or ideas or things that you need to keep in mind when you have those students that have a documented IEP in your class.
Well, making sure if you have students with adapted PE that you're aware of the information that's on their IEP, that you're an active participant in the IEP process, that you're collecting data on their goals and objectives, that you're reporting on that progress each quarter. You should be sharing that progress. Being involved, being an active part of the team is really important. And I think a lot of times in schools, PE teachers often are left out. If there is adapted PE, whether or not you're able to get to the team to share your information, but just making sure that you're actively involved in the process is a big one. Making sure that your instruction is appropriate. And sometimes you have students with disabilities and maybe you're just not sure how to properly include them. Or if you're teaching a separate adapted class, what's the best way to work on these different skills? Utilizing resources, consulting with your adapted PE resource teacher for ideas. You don't want to struggle and not sure how to proceed. Reach out to us. And, we do have tons of resources on our APE Schoology group page. We have resources that address instruction, how the IEP development, assessment, writing goals and objectives, how to access the online IEP system, or SPS. All of those resources are on there. And oftentimes those resources are great for students with disabilities, with or without adapted PE. And as we build more information about how to provide instruction and lessons and how to differentiate, there's more information on there to access. So if you're not a member, that might definitely something that you want to look into.
For sure. That resource, that group page on Schoology, has anything that you're looking for is in there. And I know it's constantly updated. I know the three of you are always updating the resources that need to be updated. And so that if you have questions, that's where you're going, the most up-to-date place to get that information. And one more thing I wanted to say with the data collection, I wrote down, don't procrastinate. You got to collect the data because that's over time. It's not the week before the meeting. It is over time. Each class, you should be jotting something down, right? So you can document the progress that your student is making towards their goals, correct?
Correct. And we have data collection sample tools on there that you can use that make it very easy. They're kind of aligned with the goal structure of how we recommend that you write goals that are in alignment with state requirements, collecting data, because that progress report at the end of the quarter, you want to be able to hopefully show progression and share data. Everything is about data. At the end of that year's time, when it's time to update the IEP for their annual review and possibly develop a new goal, and as we're trying to narrow that gap, you want to have data to be able to share why you're revising that. It's also important too with data and information that you're collecting it. If you have a student that is struggling and you're providing interventions in place or you're doing certain things, it's important that you are collecting some data there as well. Like the front end before we even get to adapted PE is collecting data or observations, jotting down those notes, because it's, parents and people of the team really want to make sure they understand what's going on.
Yeah, and like you said, the template's already there, so most of the work is done. It's just you writing in how it applies to that particular student. So it's not that they have to create anything on their own. They're just following the resources that we've provided on Schoology for them.
Yeah, and also on the Schoology resources, I talked about IEP development. We also have a document that's titled Sharing It Team, and I know many of you have been asked to attend IEP meetings. It may be an IEP meeting as a general educator, and you're asked to go in and share information. Or maybe you have a student that's struggling and you're looking to start that IEP process and do the assessment for adapted PE. That Sharing It Team document breaks down any possible time you might be asked to attend team, and it gives you an idea of what to bring, what you should be doing. Bring paper, bring a pen, take some notes, listen to what's going on at the team, because other service providers, parents, nurse are going to provide a lot of really important information that might be applicable when students are in phys ed. But the last section of that chart is looking at what are some things that you should be saying, because you don't want to sit at team and not share things or not have a voice, but you also want to make sure you're sharing appropriate information. So we have sentence starters, sentence stems that, kind of say, in our last unit of blank, so-and-so was able to do this, or they struggled with this, and just giving you some places to start, some talking points. So that's a great resource that we have on there. And
I think that's so important, because it can be intimidating to go into those meetings knowing that there's going to be so many people there, the administration, the parents, the nurse, all the OT or PT, and that can be very intimidating if you haven't been to one of those before. So that certainly is a great resource. Or if it's been a while since you've been to one and you have that anxiety building up about that meeting, that should help take that anxiety down, having that resource available to you.
Yeah, and part of that is making connections with the people at the table, talking with other professionals, looking at opportunities to collaborate. If you have a student with a physical disability, the physical therapist in your building can be one of your best friends. You can talk about the most appropriate assistive devices you might want to use. The physical therapist often will push into phys ed and can work on things. If you have a student that has communication needs, maybe a student with autism that requires some picture symbols in order to communicate, speech and language pathologists, you make connections with them. They can assist you in doing those. Really working with, in your own professional learning community and making those connections. And part of our resources and what we'd like to try and do is also encourage our teachers to have their own professional learning communities with teachers and other buildings. That if I have a CALS program at my school, that, okay, somebody that's down the street or even in another area of the county, we can have a conversation and talk about strategies that work well and what you're using and what you're doing. Shape Maryland has adapted, their conventions have adapted sessions. In the state of Maryland, we have an organization called MAPEC. It's the Maryland Adapted Physical Education Consortium. They offer information, and that's not just a bunch of adapted PE teachers. Those are general educators who are involved in those as well that have students with disabilities in their class. And as a result of the time we spent virtual, so much has now become virtual. You can look for blogs for information. There's been a lot of Facebook groups that have popped up that are sharing ideas. A lot of virtual PD, asynchronous PD that you can take and look at to really build your knowledge and your understanding beyond, what we're providing here in Baltimore County.
Yeah, and I mean, I've said this before, I think in one of the other episodes we had, that, the phys ed community is supportive of each other because we see it as it's our discipline. So if teachers need to help each other, then that's what we'll do, because it helps our discipline in general. So certainly those PLCs are very important, and you have a lot of people that are willing to step in and support in that role also.
Yes, and really reaching out to other people and reaching out to our adapted PE team or even our office for suggestions and ideas. Our goal is, as a curriculum and instruction office, is to provide support to the teachers. That's why we kind of got into it. We don't want all the paper and politics. We like the being able to support teachers and developing great programs, because that's a ripple effect. If we can get teachers to have good quality instruction, that's going to affect hundreds and thousands of students versus, what's just going on within our office. So, reaching out to us as well. That's the part of my job that I love, is going in and working with teachers and trying to address students' needs. I would wish I could do that all the time versus paperwork.
For sure. And I know that our theme this year is gratitude. And certainly I know our office is thankful for all that you and Jenny and Beth have done to support our teachers and continue to do that. And I know our teachers know that our office is there to support them, like you said. So just contacting any of us, and we will make sure that we support you as best we can. So you got the Schoology page, you got our office. I mean, use it, take advantage of it, and hopefully teachers are doing that when they find themselves needing some assistance in answering questions about how to modify and things of that nature. So, yes,
we're here to help and support.
All right, Cyndi. Well, any last thoughts before we wrap things up here?
No, I hope that everybody, just keeps moving and grooving and doing their best. Just knowing that we're here as support, and the goal is to provide good quality physical education for all students, whether students with disabilities or students of varying abilities. And don't ever hesitate to reach out and ask questions and ask for help.
Yep, those are exactly the words I was going to finish up with. So that's a good way to end it. Well, Cyndi, thank you for your time. And again, thank you to yourself and Jenny and Beth for everything that you do to help our teachers, to support them, to keep them moving forward. Like you said, it's much appreciated. And, we'll continue providing that support for as long as we need to, right?
Yes. And we're very grateful for the support from you, Justin, and Michelle in the Office of Health and Phys Ed, and supporting us and encouraging us and giving us a home and a place where we can do our job. So it's definitely, we have a great team. Really enjoy the people that we work with and being able to support teachers. That's what we like to do.
Yeah, it's a good family. Our whole Baltimore County Health and Phys Ed family, from the teachers all the way up. So it's certainly a supportive structure, top to bottom, I feel like.
Most definitely.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Cyndi. We'll wrap things up right now, and we'll see everyone on the next episode.
All right, everyone, take care.